Pretend to smile like you actually care this time. His publicist hissed under her breath as the cameras flashed like lightning across the marble lobby. But Ethan Whitmore barely heard her over the ringing in his ears. On the 12-foot screen behind him, his own face stared back in frozen humiliation, caught in high definition from the leaked video that had gone viral 6 hours earlier. The caption beneath it read, "Cold-hearted CO mocks service staff." Is this the real Ethan Whitmore? Reporters shouted over one another from behind velvet ropes, their voices sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Whitmore, do you regret what you said? Was that waitress fired? How much has your stock dropped today?" Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal Tom Ford suit, jaw locked so tightly it hurt. 48 hours ago, he had been scheduled to announce the biggest merger of his career. Now his company's shares had fallen nearly 11% before lunch. Investors were panicking, and the board had spent the last hour threatening to replace him if he didn't repair his image before Monday. He stepped behind the podium under the brutal white lights of the press conference room. Every camera lens pointed at him like a firing squad. "I'd like to apologize," he began, voice smooth and polished, practiced to perfection. "My comments in that video do not reflect my values." The back doors swung open. His chief PR strategist, Vanessa Cole, marched in wearing heels sharp enough to draw blood and a look that could freeze steam. She didn't wait for him to finish. "We're done here," she announced to the room. "No further questions." Within seconds, security ushered reporters out in a storm of protests. Ethan stepped down from the podium, already irritated. What the hell was that? Vanessa grabbed his elbow and dragged him into the hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain streaked the glass in silver lines. "That was me saving you from yourself," she snapped. "You sounded like a robot apologizing for tax fraud." Ethan yanked free. "It was an apology." "No," she said coldly. "It was a billionaire reading guilt off a teleprompter." He stared at her, chest rising and falling harder now. "Then what exactly do you want me to do?" Vanessa folded her arms. "You need a redemption narrative. Something human. Something emotional. Something that makes America forget you embarrassed a waitress on camera." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "And what? You're going to find me a rescue puppy?" Her expression didn't change. "No, I'm going to find you a woman." He blinked. "Excuse me." "A girlfriend," she said flatly. "Temporary. Public. Relatable. Working class. Someone kind, respectable, impossible to hate. You date her for 30 days. Charity appearances. Press photos. Human interest interviews. We rebuild you as misunderstood, not arrogant." Ethan stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want me to fake a relationship? I want you to keep your company." The hallway went silent except for rain tapping the windows. Then Vanessa stepped closer, voice low and lethal. "Because if your approval ratings don't recover, the board will use this scandal to push you out. They've wanted an excuse for months." That landed harder than he expected. Ethan's face darkened. "They wouldn't dare." Vanessa gave him a look that said he was being naive. "They already are." For the first time all day, something colder than anger moved through him. Not embarrassment. Not irritation. Fear. Ethan looked back through the glass at the empty press room, at the podium where he had stood pretending control while the ground cracked beneath him. His empire suddenly felt less like a throne and more like thin ice. Vanessa straightened her blazer. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. Delaney's on Lexington. We're meeting a few candidates." Ethan frowned. Candidates. Women who fit the image. She turned to leave, then paused. "And Ethan?" He looked at her. Her lips curved into something too sharp to be a smile. "Try not to insult the help this time." As her heels disappeared down the corridor, Ethan remained motionless before the rain-streaked glass, hands in his pockets, watching his reflection blur against the city skyline. Somewhere deep beneath the designer's suit, the polished arrogance, the billion-dollar title, a thought began to take shape. Quiet, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. For the first time in his life, Ethan Whitmore realized everyone around him was smiling because they needed something from him. He just didn't know yet that the only person who wouldn't was the woman he was about to try to buy. Delaney's was the kind of restaurant built to impress men who confused expensive with elegant. Dark walnut walls, brass light fixtures, and enough polished glass to reflect every ounce of status in the room. Ethan arrived at exactly 7, coat draped over one arm, expression already tired. Vanessa sat in the corner booth with a tablet in hand and 3 women waiting nearby, each dressed like they had read the same article titled How to Look Effortlessly Relatable While Dating a Billionaire. Ethan took one look at them and sighed. No, Vanessa blinked. You have not even met them. I do not need to, he muttered. They all look like they sell wellness products on Instagram. The first woman laughed too hard at his joke before he even finished it. The second touched his arm every 12 seconds. The third asked if his penthouse had a rooftop pool before the appetizers arrived. By the time the entrees came, Ethan was halfway through a whiskey and visibly regretting every life decision that had led him there. Then he heard it. Sir, if you snap your fingers at me again, I will assume you have mistaken me for your dog. The voice cut through the dining room clean and sharp. Ethan turned. A waitress stood 3 tables away, tray balanced against one hip, staring down a red-faced hedge fund manager who looked deeply offended to be spoken to like a child. She was tall, poised, dressed in Delaney's black uniform with her hair tied back neatly, and her chin lifted just enough to make clear she did not intimidate easily. The man sputtered. Excuse me. You asked for more ice, she said evenly, setting the glass down. You did not need to whistle at me like I was crossing a farmyard. A few nearby diners pretended not to listen while very obviously listening. Ethan stared. The waitress did not flinch, did not smile nervously, did not soften her tone to make the man comfortable. She simply stood there with the calm confidence of someone who had long ago stopped apologizing for taking up space. Then she turned and walked away before he could respond. Ethan watched her move through the room with measured grace, not hurried, not submissive, not trying to disappear the way service staff usually did around men like him. Absolutely not, Vanessa said immediately, following his gaze. Ethan looked at her. I did not say anything. You did not have to. She leaned in. She is not trained. She is not media ready. She looks like she would stab you with a salad fork if you breathe wrong. Ethan kept watching the waitress. What is her name? Vanessa pinched the bridge of her nose. No, but he was already standing. He crossed the dining room just as the waitress reached the service station. Up close, she was even more striking, not because of glamour, but because there was nothing polished or performative about her. Her name tag read Naomi. She looked up, recognized him instantly, and her face did not brighten the way everyone else's did. If anything, it cooled. If you are here to complain about your table, speak to the hostess, she said. Ethan almost smiled. I have a proposition. Naomi set down her tray with deliberate care. That sentence has never ended well for a woman in customer service. It is not like that. That is exactly what men say before it is like that. Ethan exhaled slowly. I need someone to pretend to date me. For public appearances. 30 days. You would be compensated generously. Silence. Then Naomi laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. A real laugh, bright and disbelieving. You are serious. Very. She looked him up and down. Tailored suit, Swiss watch, expensive shoes, the practiced confidence of a man who assumed money solved discomfort. Her eyes returned to his face. Let me guess. Your publicist thinks dating a working-class black woman will make America think you found a soul. Ethan's jaw tightened. It is a business arrangement. No, Naomi said, voice calm as still water. It is desperation in a designer suit. Vanessa had appeared behind him now, already mortified. Ethan ignored her. Name your price. Naomi stepped closer, close enough for him to catch the faint scent of citrus soap and coffee on her uniform. Her eyes held his without hesitation. You could offer me $10 million, and I still would not fake affection for a man who thinks sincerity can be rented by the month. She picked up her tray again. Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Whitmore. Then she walked away, leaving him standing there in the middle of Delaney's while nearby diners stared over their wine glasses, and Ethan Whitmore, who had spent his entire life hearing yes before he finished speaking, stood frozen, not because she refused him, but because for the first time in years, someone had looked him dead in the eye and treated his money like it meant absolutely nothing. The laughter followed Ethan all the way back to the booth. Not loud enough to humiliate him, not openly cruel, but there, soft murmurs behind wine glasses, curious glances over candlelight, the quiet electricity of people witnessing something rare, a powerful man being told no. Vanessa stared at him as he sat down. Well, Ethan reached for his whiskey and finished it in one swallow. She is impossible. Vanessa gave him a look. Which means you want her. He did not answer. He did not have to. 20 minutes later, as the dinner crowd thickened and jazz hummed softly through the restaurant, Ethan watched Naomi move between tables with the same composed efficiency, never rushing, never performing, never pretending warmth she did not feel. She smiled when customers were kind. She became ice when they were not. There was no fake sweetness in her. No polished customer service mask. Just honesty. Raw and unfiltered. It irritated him more than it should have. It fascinated him more than he wanted to admit. Find out why she works here, he said quietly. Vanessa blinked. You are serious? People do not turn down that kind of money unless they need to. Vanessa's expression shifted. You want leverage. Ethan looked back at Naomi, his voice flat. I want information. The next morning, a thick folder landed on his desk beside his coffee. Naomi Carter, 28. Bachelor's degree in communications from Howard University. Former junior copywriter at a mid-level ad agency until the company downsized 2 years ago. Currently working double shifts at Delaney's while freelancing part-time and caring for her mother, Loretta Carter, diagnosed with congestive heart failure 8 months prior. Ethan read the medical notes twice. Then he leaned back slowly in his leather chair, city skylines stretching gray behind him through the windows of the 40th floor. You dug into her hospital records? He asked. Vanessa folded her arms. You said find leverage. Ethan stared at the file for a long moment, thumb brushing the corner of the page. Something about the image of Naomi leaving work after midnight only to go home and care for a sick parent sat strangely in his chest. He ignored it. Set up another meeting. At the restaurant. No, he looked up. Somewhere she cannot walk away in 30 seconds. 2 nights later, Naomi stepped out of Mount Sinai, carrying a paper pharmacy bag, and nearly collided with a black town car waiting at the curb. The rear window lowered. Ethan Whitmore sat inside, coat unbuttoned, tie loosened, looking infuriatingly composed. Naomi froze. Are you stalking me? Get in. We need to talk. She stared at him. That is somehow an even worse invitation than the first one. Please, he said, and the words sounded so unusual in his mouth that even he seemed mildly surprised by it. Naomi hesitated, then slid into the car with visible caution. The door shut softly behind her. Warm leather. Faint cologne. Rain ticking against the roof. She held the pharmacy bag tightly in her lap. You have 5 minutes before I start screaming kidnapping. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then he placed an envelope between them. $100,000. Naomi looked at it, then at him. No, hear me out. No, your mother's treatment. Her head snapped toward him so fast the movement cut the air. You investigated me? The softness vanished from the car in an instant. Ethan held her gaze. I needed to understand what might change your mind. Naomi's face hardened in a way that made her look older than 28. More tired. So your response to me having a sick mother was to weaponize it. Ethan said nothing, because there was no better way to phrase what he had done. Her laugh this time was hollow. Disappointed. Do you know what the problem with rich men is? She asked quietly. You think money makes every ugly thing you do sound practical. She shoved the envelope back into his chest. My mother taught me that desperation can make a person compromise. But if you compromise long enough, eventually you forget who you are. The car went still. Even the rain seemed quieter. Then Naomi reached for the door handle. Find another woman to rent, Mr. Whitmore. Her hand paused on the latch. She turned back once, eyes sharp but not cruel. And for what it is worth, the cameras are not your real problem. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? She opened the door. Cold air rushed in. It means people did not hate that video because you looked rude. Her voice dropped lower, more honest than he was ready for. They hated it because for 1 second, they saw exactly who you are. Then she stepped into the rain and shut the door behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the back of the town car with $100,000 in his lap, and the first words anyone had said to him in years that felt less like flattery and more like a wound. 3 days passed before Ethan saw her again, and by then the words she had thrown at him in the rain had settled under his skin like a splinter he could not reach. They followed him through board meetings, through investor calls, through every polished smile, and every handshake from people who called him brilliant while secretly watching for weakness. They hated it because for 1 second, they saw exactly who you are. He told himself he was angry. He told himself he only kept thinking about her because no one had spoken to him that way in years. He told himself many things. None of them felt true when he found himself standing outside Mount Sinai again just before sunset, hands in his coat pockets, watching Naomi emerge from the revolving doors carrying coffee in one hand and a paper bag in the other. She stopped cold when she saw him. You really do not understand boundaries, do you? Ethan took a slow breath. I am not here to make another offer. That would be a refreshing change. He nodded toward the hospital entrance. Walk with me for 5 minutes. She gave him a suspicious look. Why? Because I owe you an apology. That made her pause. New York moved around them in honking traffic and wet pavement shine, but for a second she just stared, as if trying to decide whether she had heard him correctly. Finally she said, 5 minutes. They walked in silence down the block, past steam rising from a subway grate and rainwater dripping from awnings. Ethan kept his eyes ahead. What I did was wrong, he said at last. Investigating your family. Using your mother to pressure you. It was manipulative. Naomi folded her arms against the cold. That is one word for it. He nodded once. You were right. She looked at him sharply, clearly not expecting agreement. People around me usually tell me what I want to hear, he said quietly. I am not accustomed to being told the truth. That is not the flex you think it is. A small, involuntary smile touched his mouth. It vanished quickly. I am asking for another chance to explain. Naomi studied him for several steps. Why me, she asked finally. There are thousands of women in this city who would line up for your money. Ethan's answer came before he could polish it. Because you are the only one who did not. That landed between them heavier than he intended. Naomi looked away first. You still want me to fake date you? Yes. For public relations. Yes. She let out a breath through her nose. You do realize how insulting this entire concept is. I do now. He stopped walking and turned to face her beneath the glow of a pharmacy sign. So let me make this simple. No pressure. No leverage. No pretending this is anything but business. 30 days. Public appearances only. You control the boundaries. You approve every event. And if at any point you want out, it ends. Naomi's eyes narrowed. And why would I agree now? Ethan reached into his coat slowly, careful not to repeat the arrogance of the envelope. He handed her a business card instead. On the back, in his handwriting, was a name and direct number. Dr. Rachel Levin, cardiology specialist. Best in the city. I already spoke to her office. If your mother wants a second opinion, she will get one. Free of charge. No strings attached whether you say yes or no. Naomi stared at the card. Her expression changed, not softened, exactly, but shaken. Why would you do that? Ethan's voice lowered. Because helping someone should not require a contract. Silence stretched between them. Traffic hissed through puddles. Somewhere across the street, a siren wailed in the distance. Naomi looked down at the card again, thumb tracing the edge. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. You are either trying very hard to manipulate me better. She lifted her eyes to his. Or this is the first decent thing you have done in a while. Ethan gave a humorless half-smile. Possibly both. To his surprise, that drew the faintest laugh from her. Small, brief, real. She shook her head slowly, then looked back toward the hospital behind them, where the windows glowed gold against the darkening sky. When she turned back, her face was composed again, but no longer closed. 30 days, she said. Strictly public. Strictly professional. The moment you treat me like a prop, I walk. Ethan held out his hand. Agreed. Naomi looked at it for one long second before taking it. Her grip was firm, warm despite the cold. And as their hands met beneath the neon light and November rain, Ethan Whitmore had the strange and deeply unsettling feeling that for the first time in this arrangement, he was not the one in control. By Monday morning, the internet had decided Ethan Whitmore was in love. Photos of him stepping out of a black sedan with Naomi on his arm flooded every gossip page before breakfast. Headlines called her the mystery woman who had changed the billionaire's heart. Vanessa called it a miracle. Naomi called it absurd. Do not smile like that, she muttered through clenched teeth as camera flashes burst outside the charity luncheon. Ethan kept his arm loosely around her waist, expression smooth for the press. Like what? Like you are enjoying this. He leaned closer without moving his smile. Maybe I am. Her glare sharpened. Do not improvise. Then stop glaring at me like you are plotting my tax audit. The photographer shouted for them to move closer. Ethan's hand shifted lightly against her back. Naomi's spine went rigid for half a second before she caught herself and turned that tension into a camera-ready smile, so convincing even Ethan nearly believed it. The luncheon was held in a crystal-roof ballroom on the Upper East Side, full of donors who wore pearls worth more than most people's rent and spoke in voices permanently trained to sound impressed with themselves. Naomi walked beside Ethan beneath chandeliers and polite applause, feeling every eye in the room slide over her designer-borrowed dress, her brown skin, her unfamiliar face among old money. Some stares were curious, some approving. Others were not subtle enough to hide what they really were. At the center table, an older woman with diamonds at both wrists smiled at Ethan and then at Naomi with all the warmth of a tax audit. "How progressive of you, Ethan," she said. The sentence landed with surgical precision. Naomi felt Ethan's posture change beside her. "Barely, but enough." "Margaret," he said coolly, "Naomi is more educated than half this room and more honest than all of it. Be careful not to embarrass yourself in front of her." The table went still. Margaret's smile cracked. Naomi turned slowly toward Ethan, surprised despite herself. He simply pulled out her chair as if nothing unusual had happened. Throughout the luncheon, the performance continued. They laughed. For cameras. Shared stage glances. Held hands when directed. But something shifted when no one was watching. Ethan checked whether she had eaten. Refilled her water without asking. Quietly translated the social politics of every executive in the room, so she knew who was lying and who was merely insufferable. "The man in the blue tie," he murmured under his breath during dessert. "Cheated on his wife with a yoga instructor and now funds orphanages to feel better about it." Naomi fought a laugh behind her champagne glass. "And the woman beside him pretends to support prison reform while investing in private detention contracts." She nearly choked trying not to laugh. "You know everyone here is terrible, and you still attend these events?" Ethan sipped his drink. "I host some of them. That is worse." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for one brief second his polished mask slipped enough for something genuine to show beneath it. "I am beginning to realize that." Later, outside beneath the sweep of marble stairs and camera flashes, a reporter shouted, "Naomi, what is it like dating one of the most powerful men in America?" Naomi froze for half a breath. She felt every lens turn toward her. Ethan waited beside her, expression unreadable. This was the test. The script Vanessa had drilled into her said to laugh softly and mention his generosity, his vision, his heart. Naomi smiled at the cameras. "Honestly," she said, "he is less charming than his magazine covers suggest." The press erupted in laughter. Ethan blinked. Then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, he laughed too. A real laugh. Deep and unguarded and entirely unscripted. The cameras devoured it. By nightfall the clip was everywhere online. America loved them. The sharp waitress who humbled the billionaire. The cold CEO who smiled only for her. But long after the headlines exploded and the public declared them the most fascinating couple in Manhattan, Ethan sat alone in the back of his car replaying that moment in his mind. Not the cameras, not the headlines, not the PR success. Just Naomi's voice. Honest. Fearless. Entirely herself under pressure that made polished people lie for sport. And for the first time since this arrangement began, a thought crossed his mind that had no business being there at all. He no longer cared whether the public believed she was his girlfriend. He was beginning to care whether she believed he could become the kind of man worth pretending for. The second week of their arrangement began with breakfast at a community literacy fundraiser in Brooklyn and ended with Ethan Whitmore standing in the rain outside a cramped brick apartment building wondering how his life had somehow led here. Naomi stood under the awning beside him, keys in hand, looking faintly amused by his discomfort. "You do not have to come in," she said. Ethan adjusted the sleeves of a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent and glanced up at the building's flickering hallway light. "You invited me. Out of politeness. That was your first mistake." She rolled her eyes, but opened the door anyway. The stairwell smelled faintly of old paint and laundry detergent. Ethan followed her up 3 flights of narrow stairs that forced him to duck beneath a low pipe near the landing. "How are you alive in here?" he muttered. "We adapt to hardship in the middle class," Naomi replied dryly. Her apartment was small but warm, every inch of it lived in. Books stacked on side tables. Family photos on the walls. A knitted blanket draped over a worn sofa. The air smelled like cinnamon tea and something simmering on the stove. It was not polished. It was not curated. It felt real in a way Ethan's penthouse never had. An older woman sat in an armchair by the window, blanket over her knees, reading glasses low on her nose. Her silver-streaked curls framed a face still sharp with intelligence despite the exhaustion illness had carved into it. Naomi smiled immediately, softer than he had ever seen. "Mama, this is Ethan." Loretta Carter looked him over once and said, "The billionaire?" Ethan blinked. "That is one way to introduce me." "It is the most suspicious part of you," Loretta replied. Naomi covered a laugh. Ethan, somehow, found himself smiling. Dinner was simple: roasted chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes served on mismatched plates at a table barely large enough for three. Ethan had not eaten in a home like this since before boarding school, before private chefs, before wealth had turned meals into networking opportunities instead of family rituals. Naomi and her mother bickered gently over seasoning and television choices, while Ethan sat there oddly quiet, watching the easy rhythm between them. There was no performance here, no image management, no one trying to impress anyone. At one point Loretta caught him staring. "What?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Nothing." She narrowed her eyes knowingly. "You are looking at us like we are a museum exhibit." Naomi smirked. He is not used to people enjoying each other without an agenda. Ethan opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped, because the truth was, she was right. Later, while Loretta rested in the living room, Ethan helped Naomi wash dishes in a kitchen barely wide enough for them both to stand comfortably. Their shoulders brushed once as she reached for a towel, then again when he turned too quickly. The contact was brief, innocent, yet both of them noticed it. "You are terrible at this," Naomi said as he awkwardly rinsed a plate. "I employ people for this." "Yes, I can tell." She took the plate from him before he dropped it. He leaned against the counter, watching her dry it. "Your mother is remarkable." Naomi's expression softened. "She raised me by herself. Worked 2 jobs for 15 years. Never once let me think we were poor." Her hand slowed on the dish towel. "She used to say dignity is not something people give you. It is something you decide no one gets to take." Ethan felt those words settle deep. "That sounds like her." Naomi glanced at him. "She likes you more than I expected." "That is concerning." "Very." She smiled then, small and tired and genuine in the yellow kitchen light. For a second neither moved. Neither spoke. The room seemed to shrink around them, warm and close, and suddenly too quiet. Then Loretta called from the other room, breaking whatever had begun to form in the silence. Naomi stepped back first. "You should go," she said softly. Ethan nodded, though neither sounded entirely convinced by the necessity of it. At the door, coat in hand, he paused. "Thank you for tonight." Naomi looked at him differently now. Less guarded, not fully trusting, but less armored. "Do not make me regret it, Ethan." He met her eyes. "I am trying not to." She watched him leave, and Ethan walked down those narrow stairs with a strange pressure in his chest he could not name. Because somewhere between the chipped dinner plates, the teasing at the table, and the warmth of a home held together by love instead of money, Ethan Whitmore had just experienced something more unsettling than rejection, more dangerous than scandal, and far harder to control. He had begun to understand exactly what his life had been missing. And worse, he had begun to understand that Naomi Carter carried it naturally. By the 3rd week, pretending had become dangerous. Not because the cameras believed them. Everyone believed them now. Magazine covers called them the unlikely couple reshaping Manhattan's elite. Commentators praised Ethan's transformation. Naomi's social media followers had doubled overnight. The danger was quieter than that. It lived in the pauses between rehearsed smiles. In the way Ethan's eyes found hers in crowded rooms without thinking. In the way Naomi had stopped tensing every time his hand rested against the small of her back for photographers. In the way both of them had begun forgetting where the performance ended. That Thursday night, they attended a private corporate gala at the Whitmore Foundation, an event so polished it looked less like charity and more like wealth trying to flatter itself. Naomi stood beside Ethan beneath chandeliers wearing a midnight blue gown Vanessa had selected, the silk catching light each time she moved. Ethan had gone strangely silent when he first saw her step out of the dressing room. "What?" Naomi had asked. He blinked once, throat tightening slightly before he recovered. "Nothing," Vanessa muttered. He forgot how language works. Good sign. Now, Hours later, Ethan stood beside Naomi near the ballroom center, while board members and donors drifted around them with champagne and calculated smiles. Naomi leaned in just enough to murmur, "The man by the sculpture has been staring at me for 6 minutes." Ethan did not look. Board member. Harold Fenwick. He stares at everyone like he is pricing furniture. Comforting. He hates me, if that helps. A little. They shared a brief smile. Then Harold approached. He was silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and carried the smug confidence of a man who had spent decades mistaking privilege for wisdom. "Miss Carter," he said, offering a smile so polished it felt sharpened. "I have heard so much about you." Naomi shook his hand politely. "Hopefully none of it from the tabloids." Harold chuckled. "You are witty. I can see why Ethan chose you." The wording made her eyes narrow slightly. "Chose." As if she were decorative. Ethan noticed. Harold continued, lowering his voice in the way certain wealthy men did when they thought they were being discreet. "Though I confess, this little romance has done wonders for the company. Public sentiment is up 12 points. Remarkable what the right optics can do." Naomi went still. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. "Harold," he said sharply, but the older man only smiled wider. "Oh, come now. We are all adults here. Miss Carter knows her role in this arrangement, I assume." The room did not go silent, but it felt like it did. Naomi's face changed first, not dramatically, just a subtle cooling, the kind that made warmth leave the air around her. She looked at Ethan. Not angry. Not yet. Just searching. Waiting. Ethan turned fully toward Harold, voice low enough to slice. "Apologize." Harold laughed. "For what?" Stating the obvious. "Apologize." Ethan repeated, harder now. "Or leave." A few nearby guests had begun noticing. Harold's smile faltered. "You are choosing a temporary girlfriend over a board member?" Ethan did not blink. "I am choosing respect over arrogance. You should try it sometime." Harold's jaw tightened. He muttered something under his breath and walked off stiffly toward the bar. But the damage was done. Naomi turned to Ethan slowly. "Temporary girlfriend?" The music seemed suddenly too loud. The room too bright. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Naomi, did everyone here know?" she asked quietly. That quiet was worse than shouting. "No, did they know this was for PR?" He hesitated 1 second too long. Her face fell. Not with rage. With hurt. Real hurt. "You told them." "Only the board and senior staff. They had to know the strategy." Naomi stepped back as if distance might help her breathe. "So while I have spent weeks being paraded through rooms full of people who smile in my face," her voice thinned with disbelief, "they have all known I was a business transaction." "Naomi, listen to me." "No." Her eyes shone now, but her voice stayed steady. Controlled. Which somehow made it worse. "I knew this started as business, Ethan. I agreed to that. What I did not agree to was being the only fool in the room pretending no one else knew. I was trying to protect the arrangement. You were protecting yourself." The words landed clean and final. Ethan reached for her arm. She stepped away before he could touch her. "Do not." Around them, guests pretended not to watch. Naomi drew one slow breath, gathering what dignity she had left in front of people who had clearly been judging her all night with the full context she never had. Then she looked him straight in the eye. "For a moment," she said softly, voice cracking just once, "I thought maybe you were becoming someone better." Ethan's face drained of color. "Naomi, that was my mistake." She turned and walked away through the glittering crowd, heels sharp against marble, spine straight despite the humiliation burning through her. Ethan stood frozen beneath crystal light while the ballroom blurred around him, because in the span of 30 seconds he understood something brutal and irreversible. It did not matter that he had defended her. It did not matter that his feelings had become real, because the one person whose opinion had begun to matter most had just looked at him and seen the same man she met on day one. Naomi did not answer his calls that night, or the next morning, or the morning after that. By the third unanswered voicemail, Ethan stopped pretending he was merely trying to salvage the arrangement. This had nothing to do with PR anymore, and that realization sat in his chest like something heavy and humiliating. He had lost billion-dollar negotiations with less panic than this. At the office, the board celebrated the rising stock price while Ethan stared through meetings like a man listening to a distant fire alarm no one else could hear. Vanessa finally shut the conference room door after the others left and folded her arms. "You look terrible." Ethan did not look up from the untouched paperwork on his desk. Thank you. She left the campaign. I noticed. Vanessa studied him for a moment, then said the thing he had clearly not yet admitted aloud. You are in love with her. Ethan's head snapped up. Do not be ridiculous. You have not slept in 48 hours. You have ignored 3 investors, and you nearly fired legal because they scheduled a meeting during the hour she usually called. So either you are in love, or you are having a very elegant nervous breakdown. Ethan stood and moved toward the window. Manhattan stretched below him in gray and steel. It was never supposed to become personal. Vanessa's voice softened slightly. That tends to happen when people matter to you. He laughed once, bitterly. She thinks I lied to her. The entire time. Did you? The silence answered for him. Vanessa stepped closer. Then maybe stop worrying about proving you had feelings. Start worrying about whether you earned the right to have them. That night, Ethan stood outside Naomi's apartment building with rain dampening his coat and apology after apology dying uselessly in his throat before he could knock. But when the door opened, it was Loretta who answered. She looked from him to the flowers in his hand and sighed like a woman already tired of men disappointing her daughter. She is not here, she said. Ethan lowered the flowers slightly. Do you know where she is? Loretta studied his face. At the hospital. My tests came back this afternoon. The words knocked the air from him. Is she all right? She is scared, Loretta said simply. And when Naomi gets scared, she gets quiet. Ethan arrived at Mount Sinai 20 minutes later and found Naomi alone in the near-empty waiting area outside cardiology, shoulders curled inward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor beneath fluorescent light. She looked up when his shoes stopped in front of her. Her expression hardened instantly. How did you know I was here? Your mother told me. Naomi stood. You should leave. No, the answer came too quickly, too raw. She froze. Ethan took one careful step closer. Not this time. Her eyes flashed. You do not get to decide when I talk to you. Then yell, he said. Tell me I was selfish. Tell me I humiliated you. Tell me I made you trust someone who did not deserve it. But do not stand there pretending this did not matter when I know it did. The waiting room went still except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Naomi's jaw trembled once before she steadied it. You let me walk into those rooms blind. I know. You let them laugh at me behind my back. I know. And the worst part. Her voice cracked now despite her effort to control it. The worst part is that I started believing you were different with me than with everyone else. Ethan's face tightened. I was. Tears glimmered in her eyes, furious for existing. Then why did it still feel like I was the only one who did not know where I stood? He had no clever answer. No polished defense. Just truth. Ugly and late. Because I was trying to manage everything instead of being honest, he said quietly. Because I thought if I controlled the story, I could protect what we were becoming before I understood what it was. Naomi laughed shakily. And what exactly was it becoming, Ethan? He looked at her then with no mask left, no calculation, no performance. Only the stripped-down honesty she had demanded from him since the day they met. Something real, he said. The words hung between them. Naomi stared as if afraid to believe them. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Somewhere between your mother's kitchen and the way you laugh when you forget to guard yourself. I stopped pretending. And I do not know how to fix what I broke except to tell you the truth now. Her breath caught. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then the cardiology door swung open and a nurse called Naomi's name. Reality crashed back in all at once. Naomi wiped quickly beneath one eye and stepped away. Before following the nurse, she looked back at him, her voice quiet but no longer cold. If you mean any of that, she swallowed hard. Then prove you can be honest when it costs you something. Then she disappeared through the doors, leaving Ethan alone beneath the sterile hospital lights with the first real chance he had ever been given to become better, and the sinking realization that to keep her, he might have to lose everything else first. The next morning, Ethan walked into the boardroom and understood immediately that something was wrong. No one spoke when he entered. 12 executives sat around the polished walnut table in tailored suits and practiced silence, their expressions too careful, too neutral. Harold Fenwick sat near the end with his hands folded and the faintest hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Ethan remained standing. What is this? The chairman adjusted his glasses. A strategic review. Ethan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You scheduled an ambush before 9 in the morning. At least call it what it is. Harold leaned back in his chair. The board has concerns regarding your judgment. Ethan stared at him. My judgment. Your recent behavior, Harold said smoothly, has become increasingly erratic, emotional, distracted. We believe your personal entanglements may be compromising your leadership. Ethan's jaw tightened. If this is about Naomi, it is about the fact that you allowed a temporary publicity arrangement to cloud your decision-making, Harold interrupted. You defended her publicly against board members. You altered campaign plans without approval. You have made the company vulnerable for the sake of a woman who was supposed to be a tool, not a complication. The room went very still. Ethan felt something in him go cold. Say that again. Harold smiled faintly. You heard me. For years Ethan had sat in rooms like this and tolerated cruelty dressed in business language because that was how power worked. But now all he could hear was Naomi's voice in the hospital. Prove you can be honest when it costs you something. He looked around the table at the people who had praised him when he was ruthless, who had profited from his arrogance, who now expected him to sit quietly while they reduced the first person he had truly cared about to a strategy. Ethan straightened slowly. You want honesty, he said. Fine. The board shifted uneasily. Ethan planted both palms on the table. Yes, the relationship started as PR. That was my decision. Mine alone. And if you are looking for someone to blame for exploiting a good woman to clean up my image, blame me. Harold frowned. Ethan, no. Ethan snapped, voice sharper than anyone in the room had ever heard it. You do not get to speak about her like she is disposable after using her name to boost this company's stock for 3 straight weeks. The chairman's expression darkened. Control yourself. Ethan laughed bitterly. That is the problem, is it not? I spent my entire career controlling the wrong things. He looked directly at Harold. You call her a tool because someone with integrity makes people like you uncomfortable. Harold's face reddened. Careful. No. Ethan said, quieter now, but far more dangerous. You be careful. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. Because while you were busy monitoring my personal life, I was reviewing the private detention contracts routed through shell foundations tied to 3 members of this board. Silence detonated across the room. Harold's face drained of color. Ethan's eyes did not leave his. Including yours. The chairman stared at the folder. What is this? Evidence, Ethan said. Enough to trigger federal scrutiny, if released. Panic flickered around the table. Harold stood abruptly. You are bluffing. Ethan met his gaze without blinking. Try me. For the first time in years, no one in that room looked at Ethan like they controlled him. He straightened his cuffs with deliberate calm. Here is what happens next. Every person involved resigns quietly by end of day, or I bury this company in the scandal you deserve. Then I hold a press conference and explain exactly how this board manipulated public sentiment, exploited my relationship, and nearly removed me for refusing to keep playing your game. Harold's voice trembled with anger. You would destroy your own board over a waitress. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. No, he buttoned his jacket. I would destroy it because for the first time in my life, someone decent made me ashamed of the man I was becoming. Then he walked out, leaving 12 stunned executives in dead silence behind him. 45 minutes later, his phone rang. Vanessa, what did you do? She demanded breathlessly. Ethan stepped into the elevator. Something expensive. 3 resignations just hit my inbox, and Harold is threatening legal action. He can stand in line. There was a pause. Then, quieter. Was this for her? Ethan looked at his reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. Same suit, same face, same title, but somehow not the same man who had first walked into Delaney's believing money could purchase anything. No, he said softly. This was because she was right about me. The elevator doors opened. He stepped into the lobby and toward the waiting storm outside, knowing full well he may have just detonated the empire he spent his life building. But for the first time in years, losing power felt less frightening than keeping it the old way. By noon, financial news outlets were in open frenzy. 3 board members had resigned without explanation. Rumors of internal corruption leaked across business media like gasoline on fire. Whitmore Industries' stock dipped 6%, rebounded 4%, then plunged again when anonymous sources claimed Ethan Whitmore had gone rogue inside his own company. His phone rang so often he eventually turned it off. For the first time in his career, he did not care who was panicking. He cared about one thing. At 4:27 in the afternoon, Ethan stood outside Naomi's apartment, holding no flowers, no speech prepared, no strategy left, only the truth. She opened the door in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, clearly not expecting him. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw his face. "What happened to you?" He looked exhausted. Tie gone. Hair windblown. The carefully controlled billionaire polish had been replaced by something rawer, more human. "Can I come in?" Naomi hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment smelled faintly of tea and laundry soap. Loretta was asleep in the bedroom, the television murmuring softly through the half-open door. Naomi crossed her arms. "You have 2 minutes before I decide this is a mistake." Ethan stood in the center of the living room like a man unfamiliar with how to occupy space without authority. "I told the board everything." Naomi frowned. "Everything. That the relationship started as PR. That using you was my decision. That you were never part of their manipulation." Her face changed. "You did what?" "I exposed them," he said. "The board members using company foundations for illegal contracts. Forced resignations. Threatened federal release if they stayed." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. "Ethan, they may remove me as CEO anyway." He said it plainly. No drama. Just fact. Investors may revolt. The company may fracture. I do not know what happens next. Silence filled the room. Naomi looked at him like she no longer recognized the man in front of her. "Why would you do that?" His answer came quiet. Immediate. "Because you asked me to prove I could be honest when it cost me something." The room seemed to still around them. Ethan took one step closer, then another, careful not to crowd her. "My whole life, Naomi, every room I entered rewarded me for being cold. Efficient. Untouchable. People called it strength." His voice roughened. "Then you walked into my life and looked at me like I was not nearly as impressive as everyone else thought I was." Against her will, the corner of Naomi's mouth twitched. Ethan let out a small breath. "You challenged me. Embarrassed me. Made me question things I built my identity around." He swallowed. "And somewhere in the middle of all that, I fell in love with you." Naomi's breath caught. He held her gaze with nothing hidden now. "Not the idea of you. Not the headlines. Not what you did for my image. You." Her eyes glistened instantly. "Ethan, you do not have to forgive me today," he said quickly. "You do not owe me anything. But I needed you to know that every decent thing I have done these last few weeks," he gave a weak, honest smile, "started because I wanted to become someone you could respect." Naomi looked down, blinking rapidly. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Do you know what scared me most?" He shook his head. "That I believed you were changing." She lifted her eyes to his. "And I did not know if I could survive being wrong." The confession hit him harder than any boardroom threat ever had. Ethan stepped closer, close enough now that his voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Then let me spend the rest of my life proving you were not." Tears slipped down Naomi's cheeks before she could stop them. She laughed softly through them, shaking her head as if angry at herself for still caring this much. "You really blew up your own board for me?" Ethan's mouth curved faintly. "Technically I blew it up because they were criminals." She gave him a watery look. "But also for me. Mostly for you." For one suspended heartbeat, they stood there in the warm amber light of her apartment, years of armor and pride and fear stripped bare between them. Then Naomi stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Ethan froze in surprise for half a second before holding her back like he had been starving for permission. No cameras. No audience. No strategy. Just two people standing in the quiet of a small apartment while the city moved outside unnoticed. And with her face pressed against his chest, listening to the unsteady rhythm of his heartbeat, Naomi realized something almost as frightening as trusting him again. The man holding her now was no longer the same one she had agreed to fake date 3 weeks ago. Somehow, impossibly, he had become exactly who she had hoped he might. The next few days felt unreal in the quietest way. No cameras followed them. No publicist hovered nearby with talking points. No one staged where to stand or when to smile. For the first time since this began, Ethan came to Naomi's apartment because he wanted to, not because anyone expected him to. He brought groceries once and chose the wrong kind of pasta. Loretta laughed at him for a full minute. He helped carry laundry upstairs and nearly dropped the basket when the old elevator jerked to a stop between floors. Naomi laughed so hard she had to lean against the wall. Somewhere in those ordinary moments, affection stopped feeling dramatic and started feeling inevitable. On Friday evening, Ethan stood in Naomi's kitchen attempting to chop onions with the concentration of a man defusing explosives while Naomi stirred sauce on the stove. "You are holding the knife like it insulted your family," she said. "It is an aggressive vegetable. That is not how vegetables work." He glanced sideways at her. "You are enjoying this too much." Watching a billionaire lose to produce? Immensely. He smiled despite himself, and she caught the expression before he could hide it. It still startled her sometimes, how easy his face had become when he was not performing. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. "Vanessa." Ethan answered. Her tone was immediate and urgent. "Turn on the television. Now." Naomi muted the music and grabbed the remote. The business channel filled the screen. A headline blazed red across the bottom. Whitmore Industries Board claims CEO misused company funds in personal relationship scandal. Naomi's stomach dropped. Ethan's face hardened. The anchor continued, voice crisp and merciless. Sources close to the board allege Mr. Whitmore diverted corporate resources to finance gifts, travel, and medical arrangements for his romantic partner in what could become a major ethics investigation. Loretta's voice came from the hallway. "What is happening?" Ethan stared at the screen, fury tightening every line of his body. "They are lying." Naomi turned toward him slowly. "They are saying you paid for my mother's treatment with company funds." "I did not." "I know that." But the panic had already arrived in her eyes. "They are making it look like you bought us." Vanessa's voice crackled through the phone. "This is retaliation, Ethan." Harold leaked fabricated expense reports. "Investors are panicking. The board wants emergency review by morning." Ethan shut his eyes briefly, jaw flexing. He knew this move, knew exactly what Harold was doing. If public perception shifted from redeemed CEO in love to corrupt executive funneling resources to his girlfriend, the board could remove him cleanly. Worse, it would drag Naomi and Loretta through national humiliation. Naomi looked at the screen again, her own face now beside his in split-frame coverage, photos from galas and charity events flashing while commentators speculated about manipulation and favoritism. Her expression went pale. "My mother cannot handle this kind of stress." Ethan turned to her. "I will fix it." "How?" she demanded, fear breaking through. "They control the narrative. They have money, lawyers, press contacts. So do I. That is not enough anymore." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at the woman he loved standing in her small kitchen with tears threatening and fear in every line of her body. Not fear for herself, but for her mother, for her dignity, for being turned into another scandal she never asked for. Something in him settled with terrifying clarity. He picked up his phone again. "Vanessa, tell me you have a plan." Ethan's eyes stayed on Naomi. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning." "Good. We deny everything and threaten litigation. No silence on the line." "What?" Ethan's voice turned calm. "Absolute. We tell the truth. All of it." Naomi stared. Vanessa nearly shouted through the speaker. "Ethan, if you admit the relationship began as a publicity arrangement, the media will destroy you. Then they destroy me. You could lose the company." Ethan did not hesitate. "Then I lose it." Naomi's breath caught. He stepped toward her, eyes never leaving hers. "I am done letting other people pay for my mistakes." Vanessa went quiet. "Finally, if you do this, there is no taking it back." Ethan's answer was soft but certain. "I know." He ended the call. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier with what came next. Naomi searched his face. "You would really burn your reputation to protect me?" Ethan reached for her hand, held it firmly. "No," his voice lowered. "I would tell the truth because you taught me that a life built on lies is not worth keeping." Tears filled her eyes instantly. Ethan brushed his thumb across her knuckles, his own expression steady despite the storm waiting outside those walls. "Tomorrow they may take my title, my board seat, my company, everything I spent my life building." He gave her a small, quiet smile. "But they do not get to take the one good thing that finally made me want to become better." And standing there in the warm kitchen light with scandal gathering outside and the world poised to punish him by morning, Naomi understood something profound and irreversible. Real love did not reveal itself when life was easy. It revealed itself when someone had every reason to protect their power and chose your dignity instead. The press conference began at 9 sharp beneath lights so bright they erased shadows. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder across the Whitmore Industries media room, voices overlapping in a storm of speculation while camera shutters snapped without pause. By the time Ethan stepped to the podium, every major financial network in the country was broadcasting live. Naomi watched from backstage with Vanessa, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. On the screen beside the stage, Ethan looked composed in a navy suit and silver tie, but she knew him well enough now to see the tension in his jaw. This was the face he wore when he was terrified and determined not to show it. The room quieted. Ethan adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the sea of cameras. "Before I begin," he said, voice calm and clear, "I want to state something plainly. The allegations that Naomi Carter or her family received stolen corporate funds are false. She has never taken a dollar she did not earn, and anyone suggesting otherwise is lying." Murmurs rippled instantly through the press corps. He continued before they could interrupt. However, Naomi's breath caught. Ethan's gaze did not waver. "There is a truth the public deserves to hear from me directly. 3 weeks ago, after a personal scandal damaged my reputation and harmed my company, I entered into a publicity arrangement with Naomi Carter. The original purpose of our relationship was strategic image rehabilitation." The room exploded. Questions flew from every direction. Ethan raised a hand. "Let me finish." Slowly, impossibly, the room obeyed. "That decision was mine, not hers. She entered the arrangement honestly, with full knowledge of the terms, and conducted herself with more dignity than I deserved from the first day we met." Naomi felt tears burn instantly behind her eyes. Ethan stood under national scrutiny and kept going. "I was arrogant enough to believe I could use a good person as a solution to a public relations problem. What I did not expect," his voice shifted there, softer, less rehearsed, more real than Naomi had ever heard him sound in public, "was that she would force me to confront the kind of man I had become." The room had gone nearly silent. Even the reporters stopped moving. "Naomi Carter is the most honest person I have ever met," Ethan said. "She challenged me when others flattered me. She respected truth more than comfort. And somewhere in the middle of what began as fiction," he swallowed once, visibly, "I fell in love with her for real." Naomi pressed a hand over her mouth. Vanessa whispered beside her, "Well, that was not in the draft." Ethan's eyes remained fixed forward, though somehow Naomi felt like he was speaking only to her. "If the public chooses to judge me for how this began, they should. I earned that judgment. But if anyone attempts to question her integrity because of my failures, understand this clearly. She is not the shameful part of this story. I am." Silence. Heavy and complete. Then Ethan reached into his jacket and placed a folded letter on the podium. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Industries, pending board review. Not because I misused company funds. I did not. But because leadership without integrity is not leadership worth keeping." Gasps burst across the room. Naomi's eyes widened in shock. Vanessa muttered a word not suitable for television. Ethan looked down briefly at the letter, then back up. "Power taught me how to build an empire. She taught me how to become a man." The press room erupted into chaos the second he stepped away from the podium. Reporters shouted. Producers yelled into headsets. Social media exploded before he even reached backstage. Ethan turned the corner behind the curtain and found Naomi standing there with tears running freely down her face. He stopped the moment he saw her. "You stepped down," she whispered. "Temporarily," he said, though even he did not know if that was true. Naomi stared at him like she was seeing him all over again. "You gave up everything." Ethan shook his head once and stepped closer. "No," his voice broke slightly, honest enough now to stop pretending strength where there was none. "I gave up the version of me that was never worth loving in the first place." Naomi made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob before crossing the distance between them and throwing her arms around his neck. He held her like a man who had survived something he had been certain would destroy him. Around them, the world outside was still exploding, stocks crashing, analysts screaming, headlines rewriting themselves by the second. But backstage beneath cold fluorescent lights and the fading echo of cameras, none of it seemed to matter. Because the man who had once believed status was everything had just lost the most powerful title in his life, and somehow walked away feeling freer than he ever had before. 6 months later, The first thing Ethan Whitmore noticed was how quiet his life had become. No constant investor calls. No emergency board meetings. No assistants sprinting behind him with tablets and schedules. Just the soft clatter of ceramic mugs in a neighborhood coffee shop in Brooklyn and the sound of Naomi laughing from behind the counter because he had once again attempted to make espresso and nearly destroyed the machine. "You were a billionaire," she said, taking the cup from his hand before he could embarrass himself further. "How did you survive this long without basic life skills?" Ethan leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled to his forearms, tie long abandoned from the man he used to be. "Money can buy many things." Naomi smirked. Competence was not one of them. He smiled in a way that had become easy now. Natural. The investigation into Whitmore Industries had cleared him completely 2 months earlier. Harold and the remaining corrupt board members were under federal review. Public sympathy had shifted so violently after Ethan's confession that investors forced the company to offer him reinstatement as CEO. He declined. The decision had shocked the financial world. Headlines called it career suicide. Ethan called it peace. Instead, he had invested in Naomi's long-delayed dream, helping her open a small community marketing and events studio attached to the coffee shop downstairs, where local businesses who could not afford big agencies came for affordable branding help. Naomi had protested at first, naturally. She hated handouts. So Ethan made her sign paperwork. She owned 51%. She was furious for 3 days, then secretly touched for the rest of her life. Upstairs, Loretta's health had improved enough that she now came down every afternoon to sit by the front window and judge pedestrians with theatrical precision. "That man has the posture of someone who does not call his mother enough," she muttered one rainy Tuesday while sipping tea. Ethan nearly choked laughing. The bell above the shop door rang. A teenage girl entered hesitantly holding a resume folder, clearly nervous. Naomi greeted her with her usual warmth. The girl explained she had no experience and had been turned down from 3 places already. Ethan watched Naomi take the folder gently and say, "Everyone starts somewhere. Let us talk." It was such a small moment, barely noticeable, just kindness offered where none was required. Yet Ethan stood there frozen, because months ago he would have missed it entirely. The old version of him would have seen an unqualified applicant and moved on. The man Naomi had shaped saw something else now. Potential. Dignity. Humanity. Later that evening, after closing, they walked home together through streets slick with rain, hands linked, the city lights reflecting gold in puddles beneath their feet. Naomi rested her head briefly against his shoulder as they waited at a crosswalk. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. Ethan knew what she meant. The towers. The title. The empire. He looked at her beneath the glow of the street lamp, at the woman who had once rejected his money, challenged his ego, broken his pride, and rebuilt him into someone better with nothing but honesty and heart. Then he looked toward the little storefront behind them, where warm lights still glowed in the windows and Loretta's silhouette moved faintly upstairs. "No," he said. "Not even a little." Naomi smiled, eyes shining in the rain. "Good answer." He stopped walking, reached into his coat pocket. Naomi's breath caught the second she saw the small velvet box. "Ethan," his voice was unsteady now, stripped of all the polish he once wore like armor. "You were supposed to help fix my reputation for 30 days. Her eyes flooded instantly. He opened the box with shaking fingers. "Instead, you rebuilt my entire life." Cars hissed past on wet pavement. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. The whole city kept moving while Ethan Whitmore stood in the rain in front of the woman who had taught him how to be human. "Naomi Carter," he said, voice low and full of wonder. "Will you marry me?" She laughed through tears and nodded before words arrived, throwing her arms around him as he slid the ring onto her trembling hand beneath the gold wash of the streetlight. And as he held her there, rain falling softly around them, her heart beat against his chest, the world warm and blurred beyond her shoulder. Ethan understood the simplest truth of his life at last.